using humor when fundraising. Hi, I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz. This is the first day from the fundraising school, and I'm joined today by Mark Mayer. Mark is a clinical associate professor at the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University, where he also chairs the undergraduate committee. And Mark, thanks so much for being with us on the Fundraising Schools podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And Mark, what exactly do you do at a business school associated with humor?
So my background, before getting my PhD and becoming an academic, was in brand management. I used to run brands. And one of the things that always was interesting to me was as we would make advertisements, as we would try to appeal to consumers, invariably we'd have the funny execution or we'd make the funny ad and a lot of humor used to communicate with consumers. And so as I became an academic, it was something that I really focused a lot of my research on. And so researching when advertising using humor works, when it doesn't work, some of the context, that really makes or breaks a humorous ad, is something that's always been a passion of mine, and I continue to do that today.
And also in your own personal life, you volunteered, you fundraised, so you get our sector as well.
I do. I've worked, I was just the corporate chair for a nonprofit event in 2024, which went really well and a lot of humor involved in pulling that off, I'll tell you. And some of the leaders in that nonprofit sector, I've really admired their ability to, build a strong team, often through using humor.
There must be something uniquely positive about humor that, for example, in the advertising and marketing world, you devoted significant time to this. How can we properly use humor to build this brand and sell this product? What is unique and special about humor in a positive way that can get people's attention and even deepen our relationships in good ways?
So when you think about communicating with an audience in advertising or in any way, right? A lot of times we're trying to get that central message across, and we're trying to do that in a way that will capture attention, maybe increase positive attitudes and feelings toward it, maybe actually deepen some sort of bond, right? And humor is a tricky thing. It's one of the most used executional elements in advertising. So when you talk humor, you're going to find a lot of, you just watch the Super Bowl, right? And you look at all those advertisements, and I would guess over half of them employed humor, some to great effect, some to terrible, and some in between. And so that's kind of when I look at a humorous message that works, it gains attention, but it also accomplishes the objective. You don't want it just to be funny. You want it to achieve some other things like driving sales or increasing attitudes, things like that.
And when humor is used well, some coaching I've received in my public speaking is there are two things people will always remember: a great story and a great joke. And so, again, it can help create that lasting impression. But I know you make the point strongly that, yes, humor can be funny, but can also be unprofessional. And there's that fine line. How do we balance that fine line when we think about using humor?
There is, because humor is one of my favorite quotes about humor is that it really is kind of a double-edged sword. Like it has this edge that is wonderful, but it does also backfire. It can backfire if not used right. And, there's some specific things that I think if you're talking about humor in a professional setting, you really have to keep in mind. And I think the first and foremost one is the ability to kind of understand where the line between being funny and engendering some of those positive effects you want is, where that line between that and really turning people off, upsetting them, offending them, in worst case scenario, really damaging that relationship, because there's often a line. Sometimes it's hard to find. So my biggest piece of advice is stay the heck away from that line. Wherever you think that line might be, don't go near it.
And then some people might add to that and say, you know what, better safe than sorry. I'm not going to use humor at all. But as somebody who studies humor, has used humor, encourages humor, I'm guessing that's not the advice either, right?
It really depends on the person. I think, if you think of a person who is comfortable using humor in a public setting or in interpersonal relationships and things like that, you really don't want to go to that person and say, don't ever use humor. Just stay away from it, because it's just such a key part of our personality. On the flip side, if somebody really isn't comfortable, when they make a speech, starting with a joke, if it's just not something you're comfortable with, You don't need to. You look at those, what you're trying to achieve through humor, and sometimes you can achieve those positive feelings in other ways.
And Mark, in your advertising days, I'm guessing you tested the humor. You created a commercial, a TV commercial, a radio ad, newsprint, whatever the case might be, social media, of course. And I'm guessing you maybe tested that a little bit.
Mhm.
Uh, Is that advice for the rest of us as well? Or can we maybe test it with our colleagues or family members, or maybe in some smaller groups if we're unsure? Is there a carryover into our everyday professional lives?
Yeah, in advertising, there's not a lot that goes on the air that, especially if you talk about a TV ad or something where you're spending a lot of money on it, right? You're going to really test it carefully, right? You're going to look at that audience and you're going to do tests, and not just on the humor, but in terms of, again, if it's achieving the things you want it to achieve beyond, is it funny, right? Um, in the personal, in kind of the a fundraising world, for instance, a little bit different. Where when you think about like testing things out, I would think it's great to have somebody that you can kind of pitch things off. And if you think about like comedians bouncing things off each other, that's one of the great ways to, some comedians kind of work. You just have to be careful to not pitch it in ways that could also damage your personal or your professional job. So like I wouldn't try things out on colleagues if they were even remotely possibly offensive, because I care about that relationship too, not just that outward facing one.
That is great advice. And I know one of your key points is, there are some topics that are just always wrong, non-negotiable. We're not even going to attempt humor at this. One of my questions for you is, if when we're in the professional world long enough, the definition of wrong can change and it can evolve over time. And if I can just share a quick anecdote, this, as we record this, the television show Saturday Night Live is enjoying its 50th anniversary, and they had a big multi-hour special. And I was reading one of the reviews about the big special, and they said, they didn't show a lot of the skits from the first 20, 25 years of the show, that it was a celebration of maybe the most recent 15 to 20 years of the show. And the author speculated that maybe some of those things being joked about in the mid 70s and early and mid 80s just are taboo. Even for Saturday Night Live, we're not going to bring those up again. And that, what my mind came to was your advice of staying away from what's wrong. We also need to be aware of the changing definition of wrong, I would think. And that's something that's very important for us to do professionally.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about, there's one theory of humor to get a little academic-y here, right? There's one theory of humor that's called benign violation. And it means that humor is only going to be funny if there's some sort of violation going on, but it has to be benign, right? It cannot be harmful. It cannot be something. The problem when you're dealing one-on-one with a person is you really don't know where that line is for that person. So I may see something and take no offense from it. Someone else may see it and take incredible offense from it, right? And it's a benign violation for one, but it's a big transgression for the other. And culturally, we also have, kind of like this, like you were saying, we tend over time, that what's benign and what's not tends to change. But even now, like one of my favorite comedians is Dave Chappelle. I love watching Dave Chappelle, and when he hosted Saturday Night Live, his monologue went on for like 17 minutes, and I wish it went on, for another half an hour. But the next day, reading, some reviews, people found it offensive. People, so there again in that line, when you're a professional comedian, sometimes you cross that line, right? Sometimes you go right up to it and you cross it, and that's part of maybe Dave Chappelle's appeal. But fundraisers are not Dave Chappelle, right? Fundraisers have to build a relationship that, you don't want to go anywhere near that line crossing from benign to something that's much more malignant and possibly harmful. So that's my advice, is thinking culturally, thinking about the individual you're with, thinking about the setting, the context, etc., and then making sure that you're being careful.
Yeah, that, again, great guidance, Mark. And yeah, somebody like Dave Chappelle may see himself as a provocateur, using humor to make broader social statements and social points. We're not encouraging fundraisers to do that with their donors by any means. In fact, some of your advice is self-deprecation is best. I should be pointing the humor towards myself. And Mark, I would think that's probably helpful early on as I'm looking to establish that trust and maybe explore where that line is.
It's something that I use a lot in the classroom, right? So I teach executives, I teach MBAs, I teach undergrads, and in all of those classes with very different audiences, I'll always use some self depreciation because it's like you get the benefit of kind of poking fun at something, right? And but it's yourself. So as long as it's not hurting your credibility, like you don't want to mock yourself to the point, and as long as like I would never joke about screwing up grades with students or
No.
something like that, because immediately that would be, wow, that's not A, that's not funny, and B, are you incompetent, right?
Right.
But I can poke fun at, being older than them and, kind of being grumpy about things and not liking some things that are on social media or, my teenagers show me reels and I'm just like, oh no, no, no more reels, please. So when I joke about things like that, it's mocking myself for being a little out of touch, right? And that's going to play okay. And not only do you get the benefit of the humor, but you get the benefit for that humor attempt as well, right? Like it's like he cares enough to kind of, be engaging with us in a way that we understand.
The thing I appreciate about that tip as well is it sends the signal of, sometimes I'm going to try to make a witty remark here. There's going to be, we're in this classroom a long time, or, we're in this presentation a long time. You'll be seeing some humor coming. And I'm going after myself first just to let you know. So I think it can help create the permission and some of the self-deprecation too. And I have way too much experience with this is when the joke doesn't go well, then I have to make fun
Yeah.
of myself for that as well.
Yeah,
So
we
again,
all have that experience, but where we start a speech and that joke doesn't quite hit, and you just stand there and you're like, all right, now I'm gonna have to make another joke to recover from that joke. But one thing I'll jump in and say is that I would never make fun of a student in a way that they might be uncomfortable with, because that's
right.
one thing we have to consider too, is that power imbalance sometimes. It can be absolutely terrifying when somebody who has, a little more power in a relationship, or you look at as somebody who's, like you're a little intimidated by maybe, makes fun of you, especially among peers, in front of peers. And so that's why, in a fundraising setting, if let's say you're motivating your employees and you're poking fun at one, and it can really be an intimidating thing to have somebody who has that different kind of power imbalance making fun of you, even if you have the best intentions, even if you think it's really light, it may not feel that way for them. And so that's one thing I always stay away from is I don't make fun of students. I don't make fun of their answers. I try to joke with them, but I'm part of that. It's never really about them.
Oh, love that. Try to joke with your colleague, with your student, with your donor, but not at them in a way that can. One of Mark's tips is to be authentic, but be considerate of others, and both can be true at the same time. And Mark, I really appreciate from your business background how you've been contextualizing this topic of humor into the philanthropic sector and into the fundraiser donor relationship. And I'm just wondering if you can summarize your advice. The whole
Sure.
aspect of fundraising is, I am not looking for just that one gift. I am looking for hopefully a gift every single year over time, deepening the relationship that could lead to higher dollar amounts for the gifts from one year to the next. And hopefully it's a lifelong relationship between the donor and the nonprofit organization. And we think about with our friends, we can use humor with our family members in healthy relationships. We can use humor. In fact, we even have a name for that. It's called the inside joke that
Mhm.
only you and I know about because we know each other so well. And boy, wouldn't I love to have an inside joke or several with a donor, and yet keeping some of these cautions in mind. And so, Mark, I'd just like to ask you, how would you summarize your advice for fundraisers as they're trying to cultivate these long-term relationships with donors and thinking about, can I use humor very naturally as we build this relationship?
Sure. I think so. So the first thing I would consider is just how important humor is to our personality, our sense of humor. It's a huge piece of our personality, right? So as you get to know donors better, and as you develop this relationship, you can start to pick up cues on, what type of sense of humor they have. If humor is something that they kind of embrace, sometimes I'll wait until somebody says something humorous to me before I try to make that, kind of like first joke. But still, if somebody is a donor and they have a pretty edgy sense of humor or something like that, I still may not go along for that ride very far. So you have to like keep in mind who that audience is and build that relationship, like you were saying, like you would with a friend, like you would with a family member, while still keeping that line, while still keeping that I'm representing my organization, I'm representing myself. Whatever joke you make, somebody may turn around and tell somebody else you made that joke. And immediately it becomes something where it isn't an inside joke. It isn't a one-on-one thing. It becomes something that is, the way you're performing your job. So I think keeping those two things in mind, just that humor and sense of humor and things like that are just such a valuable way of connecting with people and to embrace it if you're comfortable doing that. But at the same time, keeping that line in mind. And that's why sometimes that making fun of yourself a little bit at the start is the best way to go. And you can kind of build from there.
Mark Mayer is Clinical Associate Professor at the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University. And Mark, thank you not just for the substance of your guidance here today, but also the winsome spirit that comes across strongly and helps us absorb this advice from you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And of course, we want to encourage you to build those relationships with donors in each of our 25 courses at the Fundraising School that lead to 5 different certificates. We're in person in 10 U.S. cities. And of course, we can be online anywhere across the world. And we have custom training. We can bring a course to you. We can knit together parts of courses for you and bring together your own customized training for your nonprofit organization. We have quarterly webinars, these weekly podcasts, and our textbook, Achieving Excellence in Fundraising, the book now out in its 5th edition. You can go online to find all of these resources at go.iu.edu/TFRS for the Fundraising School. I'm grateful for our producers today, Jennifer Boffman, CFRM, and our Emmy Award winner, Mike Anthony. I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz, and now you are now more fully informed on this first day from the Fundraising School.